Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Grapplers Academy. Bonafide PT, coached by Si. We're the Grapplers Academy. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe button, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts on today's episode. So we'll start off with the sort of wrestling discussion that we were talking about. For those of you who haven't seen the technique video that's coming out after the podcast, depending on what order you watch them in, before we started recording, we were talking about like picking options for takedowns depending on what opponent you've got in front of you, because you wouldn't necessarily shoot in for a double if you weigh 60 kilograms and your opponent's 90 kilograms, say in the open class, because it'd be like shooting into a brick wall and you'd bounce back. And
we've done a couple of weeks now on wrestling technique, haven't we? We started to talk about the concepts of wrestling a little bit more last week, so we were thinking through the week it'd be a good idea to discuss like when and where's the most appropriate time to use them. And for a lot of the time where you're in trainings, most of the time that you spend doing the sport, like competition in your weight bracket against people who are exactly your weight, is like much less of a percentage of how you spend your time of the year, isn't it? So the likelihood is that in the gym you're going to come up against people who are bigger, smaller. You go to an open mat, people are heavier, they're lighter. So it's like getting a different feel, and just even if you don't spend a lot of time rolling with people who are different sizes, it's good to know in general what's good tools to use against them, isn't it? Because it can be quite intimidating for somebody who's 65 kilos coming up against somebody who's like closer to 100. You're like, I don't want to end up underneath this guy. Or maybe even if you don't know that it's a bad idea to shoot on somebody who's bigger than you, you shoot a double and then you sprawled underneath and you're not having a good time then for the rest of the round. So you've got to pick your takedowns appropriately for who you're coming up against. And it's less of like who your opponent is, because it sometimes comes against what posture they're presenting you as well, doesn't it? So we sometimes think about levels. I think wrestlers talk about levels and matching levels in terms of head position. And generally, the rule of thumb is that if you've got the higher head position, you maybe in a little bit more dominant position, or if you're in a lower head position, you've maybe got a better advantage of getting in on a double leg or something like that. So levels is something that they talk about quite a lot in jiu-jitsu, and that can be applicable to dealing with different height opponents as well. Yeah, definitely.
And it gives you different options as well. Like you're saying, if the head's lower, you've got snap downs, you've got easier access to control the top end of the posture, which may end up your partner posturing back up, and then you have to have your entry onto the hips as well. So depending on who you've got in front of you and how they present themselves when they're wrestling is going to dictate how you grapple with them while standing. And another thing to add as well about the weight difference is your wrestling style will also vary whether you're in the lighter weight category compared to the heavier weight category. So you will see a lot faster scrambles and shoots when the players are lighter compared to heavier divisions. You'll see a lot more pummeling and clinching because there's a bigger cost and there's a bigger risk of shooting in on somebody, especially even if you're the same weight division. Trying to shift, say, 90 kilos plus off you when you weigh the same is still a difficult task, especially if they've sprawled on you, or if you've shot in, they've run around and got control of you from some other angle as well.
Yeah, even in like freestyle wrestling in the Olympics, you notice that the speed of the attacks and the re-attacks starts to decrease as you get up the weight brackets. But even still then, when they're experts of the sport, they're probably even up to like 97 kilos, guys are still pretty athletic and they're shooting doubles. The risk is lower. The whole idea of the sport is that you get a takedown and you score points off takedowns. So it's a bit stupid to say, it sounds counterintuitive to say that the risk is lower. But if you do get scored points on a takedown and you're able to get up without somebody rolling and continuing to get like a 10-point advantage of you, if you shoot a double and you get stuffed on it, that's kind of the end of that scenario, isn't it? And you can stand back up and go again. You might have another opportunity. In jiu-jitsu, if you're getting sprawled on, probably the likelihood is that you're going to spend at least a good portion of the next couple of minutes of the match, unless you've got good ground game underneath.
Yeah.
So it depends whether you want to put yourself in that scenario, and it's that risk reward, isn't it? So I quite often like to think about what can I do that gives little away but offers me some sort of opening or reward.
Yeah.
So it's about trying to minimise your level of risk, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you start looking at the way that you're going to approach scenarios against your opponents with that in mind, you're probably less likely to get put in a shitty position. Going back to what we were talking about levels as well, you should probably always try and match your opponent's level to some degree.
Yeah.
If the levels get too far apart, so let's say one person's completely stood up and somebody's in a really low down wrestling stance, the guy who's in the low down wrestling stance is in a big advantage because he can come up and shoot on that double with much more speed.
Yeah.
So as the guy stood up, you don't want to be just stood bolt upright when there's a guy low looking like he's ready to pounce on you. You want to try and match that level. And equally as well, if you're both exchanging levels and the guy's managing to get his head slightly above yours, you want to try and match that a little bit so you're not getting exposed for that front headlock or snap down position.
Yeah, I think it's like you're saying, having the slightly higher head positioning kind of goes out the window as well, doesn't it, when there's a big difference and the hips are starting to come forward.
Yeah.
Because you see the head positioning, especially in jiu-jitsu, where it's more in the lighter divisions where they're not hiding the hips so they're not getting shot on, they're hiding the hips so they can get low to the ground for a guard pull.
Yeah.
And they're hiding the hips so the person can't post on them. So there are different tactics as well. And the guard pull is a good tactic depending on the opponent you're against. So for me, if you're going to pull guard, don't do it against someone who's a guard puller. If you're going to pull guard, do it against someone who's going to wrestle to save you the points. But in the same light,
sometimes it's difficult to know what your opponent's going to be.
Isn't
it? Yeah. So you might not necessarily know the guy that you're coming up against as a wrestler.
Yeah,
you think
true.
You've got good wrestling, and then you find out immediately that the guy's got better wrestling than you.
Very true.
Or your style might be guard pulling, and then the guy you're coming up against has got better leg locks on you.
Yeah.
And then you just played right into their game. So a bit of a feeling out process is sometimes a good idea. But you've kind of got to read your opponent and kind of take what comes to you. So unless you've got a real distinct strategy and you're trying to implement it quickly at the beginning of the match, probably a bit of a feeling out process is not a bad idea. And you see it sometimes, don't you, and it's usually either people who are less athletic, bigger, or maybe a bit older. It ends up looking like a Greco match. There's a lot of head, overhooks, this and that, and it's just a very upright match.
It's just very shovey, and and I think as well sometimes with that they lose the entertainment value with some matches. But there are examples of matches where it is just a lot of clinch work where they're a great watch. For me, the recent Nicky Rod versus Elder Cruz match wasn't much action on the ground. I don't think there was any action on the ground, but there was lots of good pummeling, duck unders, shot entries, different footwork to keep an eye on. So if you have got two kind of gorillas coming at each other trying to fight for that dominant wrestling position, it can still be a good and interesting exchange.
Yeah. In
the same sense that if you've got two people pulling guard, recent one I can think of that's entertaining is Martinez versus Musumeci. Again, great match because they're both actively fighting for the good position, not trying to hold and come up for 2 points and then get taken down for 2 points. There's still an active fight going on rather than just shoving and not making it entertaining.
Yeah, I think the crux of that is having intentional wrestling. So you've got to kind of know what you want to get off the back of the takedown that you're trying to intend to do. It's no point if you're a leg lock guy, if you're trying to play snap downs or something like that, maybe you can get to the legs off a snap. Of course, you can get to the legs off a snap down eventually. But you've got to have the style that most suits what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah.
And when you see these big gorilla sort of dudes going at each other with a lot of pushing and shoving, it's because they want the takedown and they want to end up on top.
Yeah.
Neither one of them wants to pull guard because they know the risk of doing so. And I'm thinking guys like Cyborg, is a good example of that. It's like entertaining, but then sometimes he'll just shoot that quick double and get in underneath, or Galvao again, another one.
I'd like to see Cyborg shooting on Big O. That would be an interesting, see if he can finish it. I mean, that's like hitting a brick wall.
Fireman's carry. But you've got to have intentional wrestling. You've got to know what your desired outcome is. And I think this is like a big learning lesson for guys who are new into the sport as well. You have got to have your pathway from stand up to finish.
Yeah.
And we call it kata sometimes as well. You've got to have that takedown, transition, submission. You've got to start getting those reps dialed in, so you know what takedown you need to be able to pass the guard in the style that you want, to be able to get the submission that you want. It's no point in having a brilliant double leg, but or a single leg, and what you actually want to end up on is the neck. You want a Darcy, and you're going to try and hit a single leg to achieve it. It's like a bit of a there's a lot more transitions after the takedown to get back to where you wanted to be, when you could have just picked a front headlock and get good at front headlocks. Yeah,
definitely. And the only way to sort of get good at that is to wrestle regularly. And if you've got the availability, start standing up in your rounds. And sometimes as well, getting reps with a less resistant opponent. So with things that I like to do, it's more of a confidence builder, is time rounds, getting exhausted, but you're doing the same takedown for the whole 2, 3, 4 minutes against different opponents. So you can get reps of that, and then you get reps of the next stage of the sequence, and then next stage of the sequence, and then before you know it, you've built a full kata in your arsenal to get to your end goal. And you've got that many reps, so that when you go live, you know where you're going next, and there's no sort of get down to the ground, pause, think, next step, pause, think, next step. It's straight into the next step.
Yeah, that opens up another interesting topic as well, doesn't it? I think I know what the answers will probably be, but I'll ask you anyway. Would you teach from the front to back, or would you go back to front? So do you teach submission and then work backwards towards the desired takedown to get that submission, or do you go submit the takedown and then progress towards the submission?
For me, it would depend on the room. So if it's a load of jiu-jitsu practitioners specifically, then I'd probably start with the takedown, but I'd start with the end of the takedown, work backwards to the setup, and then work forward to, after the takedown, transitioning and to the submission, because that aspect of it, the submission and the sort of passing aspect, may not need as many reps, whereas the finish for the takedown and the setup for the takedown will be a little bit more unsure territory for them. And then if it was, say, a room full of people who've done more wrestling, but they've done a little less submission, I'd go start with the submission and work backwards from there. So it would depend on the room. So at Hive, I'd start with the end of the takedown, work backwards to the setup, and then add in at the end where they can go to from there.
Yeah, I think a similar sort of thing for me, really. But I think about it more in terms of experience levels rather than like style types necessarily, but it's exactly the same point. If somebody's really, like, you've got to look at what is the person's area that they need the most practicing. So if it's somebody who's like really new, it's probably better to show them the end point first, so they know where everything's channeling towards. Because sometimes you can show somebody a takedown who's really new into jiu-jitsu. It's like, you definitely need takedown, so you need to learn them early on. But if they've got no concept of what that actually leads to, it's a bit like, well, I can do this thing, but I don't know now what to do next. Yeah. It's sometimes clearer for them to see, like, right, okay, we're going to start with the rear naked choke and get lots of reps in it, getting that, and then you understand where you're trying to get to, and now we can look how to get there. So back to the point, that you said, show them the end goal and then show them the pathway of how to get there. Helps them think about it a bit easier. But for example, like, let's say it's some blue belts or some purple belts or something like that, and they've already got like pretty decent experience at finishing a rear naked choke. Maybe showing them a little tweak might help them tidy that up, but they definitely don't need as much practice with finishing the submission. Yeah. Because chances are they've had a couple of years of doing it, 2-3 years of doing it. So the thing that they probably need to get better at is the efficiency of getting the opponent into that position.
Yeah.
So it's like takedown transition. How are you going to deal with that? Can you get the reps in at that? And let's say you've got a 30 to 45 minute technique portion of the lesson. If you're starting off with the takedown, and then you add in the transition, and then you add in the submission, you've got 30 minutes of doing takedowns, 15 minutes of doing takedowns plus transitions, and then maybe 10 minutes of looking at how to do the finish.
Yeah.
So in total, you've spent 30 minutes of doing wrestling, and then 20 minutes or so of doing the actual stuff that they're already pretty good at.
Yeah.
So it's like layering where the most important thing for them is, like you say, it's reading the room.
And then it's also as well, like, if you say, like, whether of that 20 minutes where they're doing the stuff that they know about, they're still doing the takedown aspects of that as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of has that sort of merged crossover effect as well.
Yeah. If you look at it in terms of reps as well, like let's say you do 100 reps in total in the night, 100 of those reps included takedowns.
Yeah.
50 of them were working on, you still did the 50 of the takedown, but now you've done 50 reps of the transition, and maybe you've done 25 reps of the submission.
Yeah.
But in total, you've still done 100 reps of takedowns.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea when you're teaching a flow like that is to start and keep all the elements in there as well, rather than going like, right, okay, we've done the takedown now, we're solely only going to look at the transition and forget about the takedown, because you guarantee the person will fucking forget about what you just told them 2 seconds ago. It's like, oh, we're doing takedown now. And then you go, right, add it in. And then they're like, what, those go together?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, right, I thought we were just doing something different. You're like, fuck. I've got to go back and try and teach them as one thing.
Because there's like I think I read somewhere about American wrestling classes, when they're teaching kids, they always start with the end point of the takedown and work backwards. So they get in, the kid who's getting rep-ons, getting plenty of reps of break falling. The kid who's doing the takedown gets plenty of reps of actual taking down. So then if they find themselves in a similar scenario where, say it's a single leg, they find themselves in a similar scenario where they've got hold of the leg, but they might not have entered it from the setup they learned in class. Yeah. They still know, this is a single leg, I can finish this now. So it's sort of teaching everything's as important as each other, but it's teaching sort of like the more important aspects of the technique. So with wrestling, the finishing side of it can be more difficult, especially going against someone with good balance. And the setup might be difficult, but there's going to be dozens and dozens of pathways to get to the same end result. So if you focus on the end result and work backwards, you're gonna basically develop a better understanding of where you're going. There's a video I watched years ago that sort of explained it in a way that really changed the way that I teach. Was you're teaching a template, you're not teaching a specific technique. So with wrestlers, they get taught the finish and essentially the concept and the idea behind the takedown, so they can apply that template to any scenario they see fit. And he compared it to jiu-jitsu teaching, where jiu-jitsu teaching, they will teach a specific technique, and it's taught in a way that if you don't have the circumstances right, the technique won't work. Whereas if you take away that technique and be like, okay, here's an armbar, here's how an armbar works, here's what you need to finish the armbar, and then here's just one way you can get to an armbar, but you already know how the armbar works, you're more likely to find that armbar in other places, because you know that you need to isolate certain aspects, you need to separate this part, you need to use this leverage to get the finish, rather than, okay, I'm going to go for this armbar from back, but I'm not on the back, so I can't get the armbar yet. It's like it just sort of changing the way that you're thinking of approaching technique, applying technique, and also teaching technique.
Yeah, and I think that still applies in levels with people who are very, very new. Yeah. Because you almost kind of have to teach them quite a rigid technique until they've got a broader understanding of like jiu-jitsu, and then you can start layering that.
Oh yeah, of course,
so,
yeah.
Like you said at the beginning, again, reading the room. But again, like as we've discussed before, people can if you don't teach them like that, find themselves in a scenario where they could, for example, like be getting a rear naked choke, and it's just not on their train of thought because it's not the exact position that they've been shown it in a class, or like an arm bar or something like that, when it's available for them there, and they're just not seeing the what is the I can't remember the expression, the wood for the trees for the wood?
Trees for the wood, yeah.
Whatever it is.
One of them. One of them.
Yeah, you can't see the wood.
But less than a third.
Yeah. We said we were going to rename the podcast, didn't we? We had some discussion off air last week. We're not going to tell you what the name of the podcast is in case we do end up going with it, but it's fucking genius. Did we even look whether it was already named that already?
No, I don't think we did.
We'll keep it SEO. If the name of the podcast rechanges, you'll know exactly. I think the other thing, just to finish off on today, unless there's anything that you want to add in.
No, that's
No, there's just been seeing some real fun stuff on Instagram with pillow fighting. It looks well fun.
Oh, mate.
It's like what is it? Pillow Fighting Championships, the PFC.
PFC.
What a genius concept.
It's like, but how? Like, what are those pillows? Are they those like sort of
They look
rubbish cotton pillows that you can get where there's cotton balls in? Or are they the ones like from the Premier Inn where they've got some weight behind them? Or are they like the feather ones where it all just drops to the bottom?
They look pretty weighty.
Yeah.
I mean, even the sacks look fairly durable. They're like more of a canvas, aren't they, than a...
Imagine the friction burn you get on your leg. Oh man.
Just thinking, can you imagine somebody swinging a weighted gi at your face? Might as well just get some sandpaper and rub it on your face.
Well, I can imagine you sort of like out of breath, sort of like panting a little bit, your jaws open, and you just get like clocked with a pillow uppercut.
The techniques look super crisp as well. I sent you a video of two ladies doing it, and the one was, I think she had it in her left hand. She had it in her left hand, and originally the other lady had it in her right hand, so the pillows were both on the same side. And then the lady who started winning had a bit of a realisation that if she brought it to the other side, that this woman had no defence on her right side, and she just started fucking clobbering her with these like these little left hooks with the pillow. It's like fucking genius.
And there was one that I saw this morning where it was off the Goat Shed Academy Instagram, where one of the guys dropped I don't know how, but he looked like he just dropped his pillow on purpose. And he got hit a couple of times with the pillows after the.
I think he knocks it out of his hand, doesn't he? Like he hits his hand with the pillow.
Yeah.
I think the pillow comes out of his hand that way.
I think you should be able to. There should be like a 5 second.
No pillow rule.
Yeah, so like if you do drop your pillow, you've got 5 minutes where you've just got 5 seconds where you've just where you just defend until the ref stops it.
Someone taking that shit to my hand if it was a 5 minute rule. Yeah, exactly. Like you've been able to disarm your opponent.
Yeah.
Now you can take advantage of it.
Like in hockey, where if they start fighting, they've got like a minute to scrap.
Yeah. Yes.
Because like if you knock it out of someone's hand, it's not your. You shouldn't be penalised for it. They should be penalised for dropping it.
That's a legit technique, isn't it?
Yeah.
Disarm.
Imagine that sort of ducking out of the way as they're coming through like this, and you just knock it out of the hand, and then come back with that backhand.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be a pillow fighting class at Hive soon.
I might do it. Should we do an instructional? We'll have a bit of play around with it. We'll do an instructional with it on it. Pillow strikes to takedowns.
Imagine pillow MMA.
Pillow MMA.
It's pillow fighting, but with grappling.
Have you got to keep hold of the pillow?
Yeah, like you can't throw any strike other than pillow strikes.
No, but like even when it goes to the ground, you've still got to hold the pillow.
Yeah,
And
you can take your opponent's pillow as well. But then once it gets back to the feet, you have to give the pillow back. Because you can either choose to pummel or submit.
that would make it quite interesting actually, because there's a lot of submissions that you wouldn't be able to do because you're still holding onto your pillow.
Yeah.
But if you manage to take your opponent's pillow away, it'd almost be an advantage to, if you got taken down and you were getting beat up with pillows, let your opponent take your pillow away, so then you can start fighting for a takedown with 2 free hands.
True.
And then you stood up and then you both get your pillows back.
But then if say you get mounted and you just got someone clobbering you with 2 pillows and they're like proper like
Peter's letting it go for 25 minutes. But any Bravo needs to get on this.
I mean, I think it could be a TGAFC.
TGAPFC.
PFC. The Grappillow.
Oh yes! There you go. That's the name of your podcast. We will see you next week. Coach by side, the Bonafide P2. This is the Grappillow Academy. We'll see you next week.